you and I first met because you were involved with a local community college group of sort of skeptics and secularists and all of that. And I wanted to make contact with you. We met over coffee, and we just had a chat. Let's do our best to replicate that, except where's the coffee? We'll work on that. But, Marty, how did you first get into apologetics? How long ago was that? And tell me a little bit about your journey since then, and I'll interrupt you whenever I see fit. Go!
Vocab, I became a Christian in junior high, and that was back in the early 70s. And then I made it through those high school years pretty well, but I think at some point after that, I began to have a lot of questions. How do I know that there really is a God?
Right.
How do I know that the Bible really is the Word of God? And I think these are legitimate questions because I wanted to find out for myself.
Right.
You know, not just something that I was taught, not just something I was told, not just some way that I was raised, but how do I know that this is really true? So I ran into, I think my first book really was with Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
Right.
But, of course, that's a pretty heavy-duty book. It's a pretty tough read, but
and
it's
now
good.
they compiled it all together. You can get a big old golden copy, the new Evidence That Demands a Verdict. You seen that one? Big old hardbound.
I have.
It's all of it compiled and kind of updated. That's the one I have. I think that's the one you'll see in the store. But, yeah, good stuff.
It's a great book. It's great, especially for reference. And so I pretty much started there. And then over time, I became acquainted with some of the creation science ministries and began to realize that there's a whole other area of evidences, not just the what you typically think of with the evidence for the Bible and the evidence for the resurrection, all of which are important, but began to see that there was a lot of evidence from a scientific basis as far as evidence for the flood, evidence for God from science. And
so how did that get you into sort of, you're kind of reading it for your, I don't know if you want to say your own needs or where you were at in your journey, but then at some point you kind of start you might say doing. Like how did that happen or that transition, or was it just integrated into you were already doing a bunch of evangelism, or how did that happen, that transition to maybe someone say, yeah, Marty Clapp, he's a lay apologist. How did that happen?
Well, I was doing a lot of reading outside of work. It got to where everything outside of my regular job at the Postal Service, actually, everything outside of that I was spent reading, researching, and number one, because it really strengthened my own faith. It gave it really some substance, something I could really sink my teeth into. But also my real passion is evangelism. That's the bottom line. We both know that that's the bottom line. Right. And I realized that if people hold back from the gospel primarily because they think that there are intellectual obstacles, and if I really love these people, and if I really want to reach them in a culture that is very skeptical, I need to be prepared to remove some of these obstacles that are in the way, or at least as they perceive that are in the way. Really, there aren't obstacles. But so I began to do a lot of research, a lot of teaching, outreach to the students at my church. And from there, doors sort of opened up from there. From my local church there at Chandler Christian Church, a lot of the young people would say, hey, can you come speak to my high school at Fellowship of Christian Athletes or some other club? Right. And so it opened up some doors of opportunity to actually, by student invitation, to go into some of the public schools. And I think that's important because I want your listeners to realize that there is still that opportunity. The door hasn't entirely closed yet to the public school.
Right. So how long then would you say you've sort of been involved with like apologetics / evangelism, like as far when you had an integrated approach, or where that was part? Like how long has it been now?
I think it's been about 20 years.
All right. Yeah. And we're allowed to say this, right? Because you already mentioned it. The whole time you have been a mail carrier.
Right.
Is that the correct designation at this point in the in the world, or what?
Yep, that's the official
mail carrier.
Yep, letter carrier.
Letter carrier. Yeah. Because if you say mailman, of course that will exclude those who aren't male or men. Right. Just kidding. And that sounds redundant. Mailmen. Well, hey, aren't all men males? Well, who knows nowadays? But in all serious, so letter carrier or mail carrier. And so then this is why I wanted to. A reason why I want to interview you. Mm-hmm. First of all, we like doing local people, real people that we know, that we meet, that maybe some people know, but not everyone knows. The idea is to give them a platform and help them make connections, and also we get podcasted in other places. I mean, but we're here in Phoenix, and we want people in Central Arizona to be able to say, hey, here's a real guy we can get. We don't have to spend $2,000 to get so and so. Let's talk to this guy to come talk to our, just making those connections, hopefully. And so I also like the fact that, you're what we should see. Really, everybody is, but a normal guy. You had a working class job. You're doing that. You're consistent. You're using the other time. You're using the ability and resources God gave you. And now look at the doors that have been opened. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I praise God. Now, you don't mind if I ask you,
sure,
how old?
I just turned 55.
All right. Well, you're looking pretty spry. You're doing all right, probably from all that walk-in.
I wish I felt 55. I feel
you feel older?
85.
Is that what the mail service does to you?
It can wear you out.
All right. Have you ever been bit?
No. In 23 years of career, I only had to reach for the dog spray once.
Oh, okay.
That's pretty good.
So, have you ever been bit by a human, though?
It was a human. No.
Right, yeah. That's what I meant. Yeah, it was. Well, okay, so that's good. We're glad you're alive and well and here with us today. Now, we have 2 more segments left. Can we come back? Is this a good idea to actually talk about some of the experiences that you have been given, some of those opportunities with high school, and especially with like the college skeptics group? Because I said, hey, I want to talk to this guy. He's mixing it up with people of different worldview. He's being faithful to Christianity, and he's being salt and light in this situation, and I think that's good. I mean, give us a snapshot of some of the things you've done. We only got a minute left, but what are some of the things you'll flesh out in detail when we come back? What are some of the things you have done?
You bet.
Well, no, what are they? Tell us.
Oh, what are they before we go?
Yeah, but just say that they are, and then we'll talk about it in detail when we come back.
Well, I've been in quite a few of the high schools, and we can talk about some of the various students that I've run into. It's been pretty interesting. Yeah. And then at some of the community colleges, sometimes it's not so friendly.
Right.
It can be a pretty hostile environment.
Right.
But God has always used them, and as you're going to see, a lot of good has come from it. God is really using these situations for His glory.
What about churches?
Churches, yeah. I'm mostly at my church, but I have visited other churches in the Valley as well.
Well, let's talk about that when we come back. We're talking to Marty Clapp, and we are asking him about some of his real-life experiences that he's had. God opened up doors in high schools and community colleges and churches while he's been faithfully delivering the mail. He's been faithfully trying to talk to students and kids and use apologetics and the evangelism. So, Marty, tell us a little bit about that and what we can take away from some of your experiences there.
You bet. And first of all, let me just say I'm glad to encourage the listeners in that you don't have to be a quote-unquote professional apologist with a Ph.D. to do this, because after some of the talks, I've had people come up and said, hey, I want my kid in your science class. Where do you teach? And they're always kind of shocked when I said, well, I'm not a science teacher. I'm a letter carrier. But this is, and it just goes to show that learning doesn't always have to be formal education. A lot of it is just turn off the TV, dig in. There's great resources, and educate yourself, because there's a lot of great material. But getting back to your question, several years ago, it's been about 10 maybe years ago, I was out at Red Mountain High School about 7 times. So we've had some really engaging conversations. Now, the thing I like about those arrangements with something like Fellowship of Christian Athletes or some other student-led group is that a lot of times they'll invite their unbelieving friends.
Right.
And so I remember one particular talk, there were 4 or 5 students in sort of very goth attire, and they came walking in and sat in the back, and the teacher approached me before we got started and said, hey, I'm going to ask them to leave because I know why they're here, and they're actually literally witches, and they're just going to come to disrupt and to give you a bad time. And I told her, I said, hey, I want them here.
Right, yeah.
I'm here for them. And they were awesome. They didn't. There was no disruption. There were genuine questions.
Yeah.
And so this has been a great interaction with the students. There was one young man that would come every time, and I think that even though his intentions were to try to probably ask a really tough question in hopes that he would shut down the speaker, he found out that there are good questions, or rather there are good answers to his question. In fact, I'll never forget one time in particular, he had a comment after a presentation I'd given on the scientific evidence for God. And this young man had said, "Oh, so you're saying that God was always there. He had no beginning." And I said, "Yes, I'm saying that God is self-existent. Nothing caused him, nothing created him. He didn't come from anywhere." And this young man sort of was kind of ridiculing and laughing and sat down. And a young lady to my right had asked a question. And I said, "If you don't mind, can I come back to him for a moment?" And coming back to this young man, I said, "I'm not sure why you find that so comical," because I said, actually, as an atheist, I said, you have a very similar question, a similar problem.
Yeah,
and that
similar
is that,
belief.
yeah, because you have to believe in some form of eternal matter before the origin of the universe. You have to believe, to put it in simple terms, I said, I'm saying that someone was always there. You think that's silly, but you have to believe that something was always there, self-existent matter. Or
self-created matter.
Or self-created, which is really a contradiction in terms.
Right.
And then he said, well, we'll just call it even. And I said, well, it's not so easy, because once you get into the information argument in DNA, it settles that one of them is much more believable.
We'll call it even.
We'll call it even.
I like that, actually.
Yeah.
So who knows? Yeah, that's yeah. But what's good though is, it's sometimes we don't think high school kids, maybe we sometimes think we need to talk too low to them. And so a kid comes into like a youth setting and, they ask some deep questions. And I'm not trying to say it's always like this, but sometimes the tendency can be, hey, here's another piece of pizza. Take your mind off of it. Come to our fun thing next week. I don't really know. But it's not like they'll be mean necessarily, in those youth settings. But not very often very solid or real answers. And the thing is, the bright kids amongst these groups, I think they're asking these questions even in junior high. They're starting then.
Oh, they are.
And then we're trying to talk to them in college, and they've left all this stuff a long time ago.
Right.
So that's why it's important what you're doing. We need more mail carriers to be involved with these real-life apologetic questions with real-life solid answers. We come back, let's talk about some more of the high school and perhaps college experiences you've had, Marty. I've been talking to Marty Clapp about doing real-life apologetics, like in church groups with youth and on high school campuses and college as well. And hey, they ask questions, and that's the kind of stuff we need to be able to answer. You got a Q&A going on there, hip-hop style. So, Marty, tell us some other things maybe on the high school tip, and then we'll flip it into some of the college stuff, because I think listeners that are listening should be encouraged, because I want real people to think this way. I should turn off the TV more. I should be reading more. And, I'm excited to do this more because I want to impact people this way. So let me change some habits. Let me change some stuff in my life. All right. And let me just look for opportunities and see what God will do. I want to inspire and encourage real people, men and women, in churches now to kind of think that way. And so that's why I wanted to have you share. So what else has happened that you think would be beneficial that way for everybody to hear?
Well, one of the things that I would really encourage the listeners, as far as in their churches, to encourage more apologetics training for their young people, because I think churches, by and large, Vocab, I think they've done a great job of having fun events and events that will draw the students. So we've had great camps, and churches have events that will and have taught students how to love God with all of their heart and emotionally. But the Scripture says to love God with all of your mind as well. And so we really need to focus on teaching them, showing them how to love God with their mind. And the outcome of that, getting back to some of the high schools, something that happened last year, one of the local schools had one of the students in our church had invited me to her school. She had heard that I've gone to some of the other schools in the Chandler area, and she said, would you come to my school? I said, I'd love to. And this student had set up a Facebook event, and all that it said was, does God really exist? Is there scientific evidence for God? And put up a beautiful deep space photo. So that's all that the title said, and you would be surprised at the feedback, and not all of it positive. I mean, it just created a flurry of controversy on every imaginable topic came out of that one question: does God really exist? Right. So there was just a flurry of comments on this issue and that issue, and so I could see it escalating. And what was going to be about 12 Christian students in the French teacher's class for a Bible study, all of a sudden there were 70 students that said, I want to come to this.
That's awesome.
So she set it up during the bee lunch at the high school, and I got there a little early, and someone at the school said, well, you've got so many students coming to this thing, we're going to have to move you to the lecture hall, which holds about 70 students.
Right.
And I said, I would love that.
Yeah,
That's perfectly fine. And so went in ahead and just really prayed that God would open the minds and the hearts of these students. And so Vocab, as the lunch bell sounded off, all of a sudden, all these students with all their backpacks and their gear and stuff came pouring into this about 70-person auditorium, packed it out.
Right.
And so I gave a presentation on the existence of God from science and philosophy.
Yeah.
And actually, the students said, we would like to ask him a lot of questions. So is there any way that he can kind of chop it down to where we have more question time?
Right.
And believe it or not, I kept it to 10 minutes where I gave what I think is one of the biggest arguments for God, and did that in about 10 minutes. And the rest of it was Q&A. And these students, I got to tell you, they are very smart.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, very smart students, but they asked a lot of great questions. And, to God's glory, really, these students, no matter how hard some of the atheist students tried to think that they could defeat the arguments from an intellectual perspective, man, God was very gracious that all of their attempts just failed. And but I told the students right up front coming in, I said, hey guys, I saw the comments and I realized that emotions are running pretty high. I'm not sure what you're expecting. Maybe you're expecting some sort of an argument or a debate. I said, but you know what? The fact of the matter is, I'm really no different than you are, other than the obvious age difference. But I said, just like you, I just want to know what the truth is.
Right.
I said, if there really isn't a God, I need to know that. If my folks are dead and gone, and if I'm never going to see them again, I think I need to know that. I don't want to spend the rest of my life just foolishly pursuing some nonsense. And I said, but on the other hand, I need you to be equally open to the possibility that if there really is a God, are you open to that? Because I think the evidence is going to be very compelling. And that's why I just laid out the evidence and showed them that this is not just a belief that we have. This is true.
Right.
It's objectively true, and it's true for everybody, whether they acknowledge it or not.
Yeah, in high school, students are still generally more open. Man, they get to college and give them one or two classes, whether it's their first science class, their first philosophy class, and it's almost like gone. It can be that way. I'm not saying it always happens that way, but I notice even with the bright kids who will maybe say, yeah, I'm an atheist, yeah, I'm a secular humanist, yeah, I'm this, but you talk to those bright kids in high school and you can have a much more open, good conversation with them, in some ways almost more mature than, adults, because there's still a willingness to listen to some of these things and almost an idea of, some of this I've never heard. There's something being held back from me. I feel like they have sort of their curiosity is still there. They're like, well, I never even heard of this viewpoint. This sounds crazy, but what do you mean when you ask me about this question about morality? I just always assumed, da-da-da-da, and it's good. Well, we only got a few minutes left. Let's talk about colleges if we can. What about those situations? Tell us what's went down, Marty, on that scene.
Well, through a mutual friend of ours, he does teach at one of the community colleges, and because we had met a few years ago, and he knew that I was doing this sort of outreach, he said, hey, can you come to some of my classes? I teach religion and philosophy, world religion. And, of course, I would love to. So I showed up and have been there several times in his classroom as the students are allowed to ask you very sincere questions about Christianity. And but then they do ask you the tough questions. And I think that they're surprised to find that what they thought would be a question that would go unanswered, there are very good answers to the questions.
Right.
For the most part, it's been a very positive experience. I've thoroughly enjoyed engaging the students on every topic, from evolution to other world religions, and why do we think that Christianity is the truth, and so I think they're very surprised at some of the answers. I don't think that most people realize that there is good evidence for Christianity, and so the engagement of these students has always been a pleasure. We only had maybe one person I can think of, and He was very, very hostile.
Right.
Yeah, he actually cussed us out there in the classroom, and the teacher or the professor had to I'm going to put you in time.
Right.
But what was amazing was even that experience, even though it started out that way, with this guy treating us horribly, actually. We hadn't even really said anything yet. But just given his worldview, when he found out we were Christians, he had already had made up his mind. But the long and short of it was, even after he treated us so poorly, was as the session ended, I saw him sort of throwing his books into the backpack, and I could just see this gentleman was very upset.
And he was doing a lot of this. You, Christian, evangelical, something like that.
Yeah. I should have had you there at the time to bleep him out because, but what was, what turned out, or what he intended for evil, God did use for good, because even though he treated us that way. And as I saw, he was so flush in the face, he was so mad, and I thought, you know what, Jesus died for this guy.
Yeah.
I can't just leave him, let him go like this on bad terms. So I went back to the back and sat on the desk across from him, and he didn't really want much to do with me, and I put up my hand out high, I'm Marty, and he introduced himself, and I said, we just came to answer questions today. I hope if we've said anything to offend you, I'm sorry. It wasn't our intention. And once we shared God's love, just showed love toward this person, his attitude really changed.
Right.
And he said, I'm really sorry I treated you that way. And I said, that's okay. In fact, I said, I actually have more respect for someone who passionately disagrees with me than just apathy.
Right.
Apathy's dangerous, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah, not caring at all is worse.
Yeah. So that particular day really stands out in my mind. But every experience at the local community colleges has been really good.
And you've done some where you will meet in a professor's house or someone's house, and they'll kind of have a topic or a speaker, and it's more of an intimate setting with college students, but others too, a variety of worldviews, everything from Buddhists to alien chasers to ghost chasers, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, we've even had transsexuals.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then you'll be the evangelical Christian, Marty Clapp, represented, and you've been in those settings as well too. Have those been good? I mean, because really anyone that was available with the right demeanor and the knowledge could be the Christian in that situation, and we need that.
Right. It's been a great experience because, as you say, he wanted somebody from every worldview.
Right.
And I think given some of the topics, I think a lot of Christians would just run in the other direction and go, I don't want to deal with that. But, again, Jesus died for those people. And so we don't dare run in the other direction. We need to go to where these people are. And so, we've, as you said, we've had every controversial issue and topic being discussed in a very organized and orderly way. And so it's been a real opportunity to show them that Christianity has good answers, that in a very comprehensive way, it makes sense. The worldview of Christianity makes sense in every area of life. What is the purpose and meaning of life? Where did we come from? How did we get here? Where are we going? The questions of, worldview. So it's been a tremendous experience. And I've engaged everything from very hardcore atheists. One lady was a very militant feminist, and that was interesting. That was very, very interesting because instead of staying on the surface of the issue she was raising, I really was asking her fundamental questions about, before we talk about equality, we need to talk about what is it that makes people equal fundamentally.
Right.
What is it? And ultimately what you find is that apart from God, it's very hard to
where
make
do you,
the case.
How can you pump dignity and value and worth and what you might call natural or inalienable rights, unalienable, I meant, how can you pump those into a system that's blindless, pitiless, indifference, chance, random, cold, uncalculating, unmerciful universe that just it is what it, where did you import all this kind of transcendental stuff in from? And that's a problem, I mean, we're made in the image of God, Imago Dei, but the secularists, the evolutionists, they don't have any such recourse to that. They just kind of got to put it in there and say, well, it's just that way because we like it that way.
Yeah, and that's just arbitrary.
Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, sometimes we'll point out to them that's just arbitrary.
Yeah, it should be consistent within a person's conceptual framework, ideally. And Christians, that's the thing. Christians, we got to fashion out and hammer out what a Christian worldview looks like. So everyone should be involved in evangelism. That's the church's job. Jesus said, hey, the Father sent me. Hey, disciples, now I'm going to send you out into the world. Here's the Holy Spirit. You know what I'm saying? That's what he said in John chapter 20. That's what we need to be about. And so even if you may not be doing apologetics and all that, you got to be doing evangelism, which will have some apologetics in it. But we need to be fashioning this in our own minds so that we're faithful to Christ and that within our families we're able to instruct and teach too. So important stuff. We got 10 seconds for closing words. Marty Clapp, the mailman apologist. What's up? Anything else you want to say?
Well, it's been a pleasure to be here and appreciate the ministry you're doing. This is tremendous.
Thank you very much.